Okay, so welcome everyone to Engineering Biology Research Consortium Student and Postdoc Association's panel on applying to faculty positions. We're really excited today to welcome 5 great panelists, faculty members from across the country and even up in Canada who have come here to provide their insights on applying to faculty positions. As you can see, they range from very experienced faculty to very recently joined faculty members. And so we should be able to give you a nice broad range of their perspectives on applying to positions and also reviewing applicants to faculty positions. I'd like to go down the line from left to right here and just let each of our faculty members briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some prepared questions and then open the floor up to audience questions. So Danielle, go ahead.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Tullman-Ercek. I'm a professor in chemical and biological engineering at Northwestern, where I also have 2 other hats. I direct a master's program in biotechnology, and I'm co-director of our Center for Synthetic Biology. More or less good. Okay.
Hi, I'm Kevin Solomon. I'm an associate professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at University of Delaware. And so I just went through the tenure process and got promoted in 2023. And I guess I've gone through this process, I guess, at least twice. So I started off my career at Purdue before moving to Delaware. And so I can talk sure about that perspective as well.
Hey, I'm Nils Averesch. I just recently started as a new faculty member at the Microbiology and Cell Science Department, University of Florida, really just in August. So yeah, my experience is really fresh on a tenure track, how to apply to a tenure track position.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nika Shakiba. I'm an assistant professor up in Vancouver, Canada, at the University of British Columbia. I started my lab 4 years ago, so I'm starting to get more involved in the helping to hire new faculty, but also have a decently fresh memory of what the application process was.
Hi, I'm Josh Atkinson, and I'm an assistant professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Princeton University. I started my group in January, so we're about 9 months into this. And I'm also part of the Oman Darling Bioengineering Institute here at Princeton, which is a new institute. And so pretty fresh perspectives on going on the job market in the last few years, yeah.
All right, thank you everyone for introduction. We'll dive right into the questions that we prepared first. So our first question is, why did you decide to pursue academia? And what was your path to your current position? And we could perhaps follow the same order that we did for introduction.
Okay. I am going to start by finishing my introduction with something everyone else added. It's been 8 years since I last switched positions and 16 since I was on the job market in the traditional sense. So my experience here is probably dated, but I review a lot. I'm on a lot of hiring committees, so I can speak from the other side when I'm talking here. I decided to go into academia in part because I'm a good judge of what I don't like to do, and I wasn't liking my opportunities when I was interviewing for all kinds of jobs towards the end of graduate school. My advisors knew better than I did, I think, what I would enjoy doing and do well, and I listened. So I was navigated onto this path with their help when I was expressing frustration with the opportunities in industry for what I wanted to do. That is a very short answer to something I could go for 15 minutes, but I think that suffices. I'll hand it over to Kevin.
So yes. So, I mean, like Danielle, like in similar fashion, I recognize what I didn't like to do, but I guess what drew me to academia and being a professor is that, one, I enjoy the flexibility, the freedom to set my own agenda. So essentially, I don't want a boss. 2, I didn't appreciate the incentives for industrial positions. And so I find, for example, student mentorship far more rewarding than, for example, the fact that I've made a widget that's like 10% more efficient. And the scientific problems, I think, as my interests wax and wane, my portfolio waxes and wanes. And so I really love that perspective. As for how I got on this trajectory, I think as a PhD student, I had the opportunity to mentor a number of RU students, and through that get a little bit more trained in pedagogy, among other things. And so just kind of looking beyond traditional research and getting value from my interns, but more about like how do I serve as an effective mentor and role model for them, and pursuing those types of experiences kind of put me on this path.
Yeah, similar motivations for me. Also knowing what I don't like to do and what I like to do. I have a great passion for research, and yeah, I was thinking about industry, but didn't really like how research is done there. Like, I like research that I can direct independently and like really transform my own ideas, and especially research that is immediately public and that everybody has access to mostly. And yeah, that has the potential then to generate change and immediate impacts, and also to do more fundamental stuff that doesn't necessarily need to generate a revenue in a short time. Yeah, that's what I liked about, or what attracted me to academia. Yeah, my path to academia was mostly long. Like, it took me 8 years after my PhD to get to a faculty job. I went through different positions, like first associate researcher position at NASA Ames Research Center. Then I became a postdoc at Stanford University. Then from there, slowly formed my own research group, and then ultimately made the transition to a real PI position.
Yeah, I think I was also attracted to academia for a lot of the same reasons. And I like to describe academia kind of as like a pick your own adventure. You can, change the direction of what you're doing in your science, but also what kind of researcher and academic you are. So, if you're really passionate about teaching, you can lean into that a little bit more. If you, later down the line decide that, you want to change your research direction, you can do that. You operate largely as a startup, right? So it's your responsibility to fire your team members, to ensure that your team is functioning well, and morale is high, but that you're also bringing in funding to enable the projects, that you're balancing the various different hats that an academic wears. And I think the flexibility and the ability to flip between the hats is really exciting and quite unique to academia. And like, if you decide that research and teaching are great, but you want something different, you can start companies, you can, lean into outreach. So there's a lot of different things that you can do as an academic. And I think for me, that's largely what captured my attention. And I didn't have my sights set on academia to begin with. I actually had a bit of a twisting and turning path. I did a 7-year PhD, and during that time, I kind of had an existential crisis and wasn't sure what I should do. I applied to medical school. I put my deposit down. I was getting ready to pack my bags for medical school, and then my advisor ultimately pulled me off of that ledge. And reminded me, or forced me to reflect and make a more informed decision about what I would want my long-term impact and career to look like. And then I decided to pursue a postdoc. So I did a very short postdoc, 2 years, and then I was on the job market.
Yeah, so I share a lot of the same sentiments of the others. I really value the sort of intellectual freedom that you get in academia and getting to drive your research program in the way that you find most interesting and stimulating. And so that's the thing that initially drew me to it the most. And I would say as a graduate student, I had quite a bit of experience mentoring undergrads as well as sort of more junior grad students as they joined the group. And that's something that I started to develop a passion for. I really enjoy kind of this hands-on mentorship of seeing people grow as scientists and engineers, and kind of when the light bulb clicks on for people and they start to understand what it is they're doing. And that experience is, I think, bar none, the highlight of my job now, and I'm enjoying that quite a bit. Also, I really enjoy collaboration and trying to push myself into areas that I'm not necessarily already bound to. And so I'm in a civil and environmental engineering department now, which is not where my training background was. And so I've been really enjoying applying sort of synthetic biology to environmental engineering questions. And that's been something that's been really a highlight of trying to do an academic career in that sense. And my path, so I sort of got on this path as a junior graduate student, started writing, a fellowship application to try to get an NSF GRFP, and that experience was really kind of pivotal in changing my perspective on what I wanted to do. Before, I was definitely intending on going into industry, but I really enjoyed the process of actually writing a grant in that setting, a fellowship in that context. But doing that hands-on process with my advisor at the time made me learn that I enjoy grant writing, and this is something that I actually find to be fun. And so academia is a great place to write grants. So yeah, it's definitely something that drew me here. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. So I'd next like to ask about your experiences with applications to faculty positions. And I guess for the more experienced people, since this may have been further away, you can talk about your perspective as sort of a member of a search committee, or when you're evaluating new candidates to your department. What are the important things that you look for in candidates? And then maybe we can see some convergence here. And Kevin, since you mentioned that you've also done an associate professor application, if you can talk about that a little bit too. And you can go in any order now. Maybe I'll make Kevin go first.
So okay, so clarification. I moved before promotion, but so they were both assistant professor, but professor applications. But I guess one was a little bit more informed than the other. So apart from applying twice, applying and getting 2 jobs twice, I've served on three search committees at 2 different institutions in 3 departments. And I think the trends are all the same in that, yes, the competition is very like the applicant pool is very competitive, but at the same time, it's probably not as competitive as you would imagine, in the sense that I would say easily 60, maybe 70% of the applicants you can disregard immediately just because they're not responsive. And so even though I think a lot of people, they're terrified that there's like maybe 100 or 200 or 300 applicants, the vast majority of those applicants they are in a different field. They just, God forbid, they don't have a PhD for whatever reason. I don't know what emboldens people to apply. And so the pool of viable candidates is far smaller. I mean, I'm trying to think of what else I can say very quickly, but I guess that would take too long. So I'll stop there and let the rest of the committee expand.
I'll build on that because I do feel like maybe we can each just touch a thing. But the non-responsive to the solicitation, or even just the department or whatever we are hiring for, is great. And then the second thing that I look for is someone who is articulating why they're applying for this position. And so kind of what drives me nuts when I'm reading them is to read an application that they didn't even take the time to switch the name of the place, for example. Just those little things that make it clear that they really are interested in coming here if we were to bring them into interview, because it's such a process. We want to bring in only the most serious people about, willing to live in Chicago in our case or whatever. So yeah, being very deliberate in framing that cover letter or the research statement, kind of both, in a way that makes it really obvious that you've considered this place seriously as a place you'll go. Okay, that's the one I'm contributing, passing it.
I think sort of building on that slightly is there's kind of multiple approaches that people take to applying to faculty positions. Some people kind of take a shotgun approach and apply everywhere and don't customize their documents very much. And I, that was something that as I was applying, that was where I spent most of my time, was learning about the institutions that I was applying to and kind of honing in on ones that I genuinely thought that I would like to work at and I would have colleagues there that I appreciate. And I think, having that in mind when you're going on the job market's important.
Maybe I can add, I think scientific storytelling is really critical too. I mean, you want to make people excited about your research. If you can't communicate what is exciting, impactful, and also like rational and reasonable about your research, then you're going to have a really hard time getting grants and being successful. So that is something that you really need to show through your paper-based application, but maybe even more so when you're in person and giving a talk.
Yeah. So I think that is true, that the application should be tailored really closely to the position. if that is possible. I've experienced that it is often difficult because there's not much information in these solicitations. For whatever reason, sometimes the search committee wants to keep it broad. I've heard, I haven't been on a search yet, sometimes for other reasons that I don't know. I've applied to easily 60 positions throughout my whole career. To answer the question how my experience has been, foremost frustrating. Not gonna sugarcoat that. Yeah, I did tailor most of my applications. It might be that I'm just in a niche that I didn't really fit in anywhere. Maybe I went to the wrong schools with my application because I'm considering myself a chemical engineer, but ultimately what I do is space microbiology. So now I ended up in a microbiology department, and maybe that's where I should have looked. So I guess my recommendation is think closely about where to apply, like where you really could fit in. And I think that's where I ended up because this was just a really good fit.
I just wanted to go back really quickly just to kind of follow up on the comment about scientific communication. So for the vast majority of applicants, the schools that they will apply to, you're applying to that place because, or there's an opening in that place because there's nobody in your niche. And so very frequently, the people who are evaluating your materials are not in your field. And so you really need to think about making your materials very accessible and conveying that impact very clearly. And I feel that as trainees, many applicants, they feel they're trying to show that they're really awesome and brilliant, and they go into the weeds with the technical expertise, but that does not land effectively when you're talking to a search committee that's made up of people from multiple subdisciplines in your field that probably don't have a peer that can actually translate your speak into something that they understand. And so you really have to think about speaking at the 1,000-foot level, not get too buried in the weeds.
Great, thank you. From, I guess, as a follow-up, from a more practical standpoint, would you kind of see most of those values from the cover letters that applicants apply, or is there any other avenue that we can kind of emphasize that I'm a really good fit for the program? And have you seen any like impressive application package in terms of that?
So I think you can weave elements of this into sort of your research statement and your personal statement and make these touch on things that are unique to the institutions you're applying to. Not everywhere requires a cover letter. Most places do, but I applied to a handful that didn't. And so the only opportunity you had was to really put these into those other documents. And so, highlighting, resources on the campuses that would be relevant to your work, like core facilities that might be available to you there that are ones that are, actually listed that they have, people that you might be able to collaborate with on certain research projects that you're pitching there. Those are ways to kind of bring those ideas in outside of the cover letter, that is.
Yeah, I think for me, it mostly is in the cover letter for the first pass. And I don't know that every committee is the same, but most of the committees we have here have some like triage person that gets rid of anything that's, for example, somebody without a PhD. And then it comes to us to triage the second time. Once we have the real applicants. And that second triage has two people looking at each application. And the idea is that we each look at, depending on the search, anywhere from like 30 to 70, just to give you an idea of volume. There's still a lot, and a lot of them will not even be considered truly responsive, right? But this is the ones that are at least real. And so I think for me, it's kind of got to be like right there in that cover letter, but I skim then the rest of the documents to make sure it wasn't only in the cover letter. So it's really important to weave as much as you can throughout, which means a lot of time on the application, unfortunately.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, sorry, and I totally agree. I think that the application materials are so unstructured. So, for example, even though we all know what a CV is, you'd be surprised at the diversity of formats. And so I find the cover letter at least helpful in highlighting things that I should be looking for as I skim through the application. Otherwise, there's lots of important details that I might miss. And so I think highlighting the things that you think that you are proud of, that you want to highlight, and as well as underscoring the things that you think make you a good fit for the position, in the cover letter will then arm me to look appropriately when we triage and do a first round of scoring.
Just a second thing I just thought of when I look, one of the biggest weed out places for me on these like first pass is the teaching statement. If somebody's a chemical engineer by training and they're applying to a chemistry search, that's totally fine. They're not going to get triaged out. But if they say they're only going to teach like one class that's overlapping between the two curriculum, that generally does kind of disqualify them from the get-go. So thinking very broadly about what you're willing to learn to teach, it can go a long way if you incorporate that into your statement and make clear that you know the curriculum is different than your background and what you realistically can teach, and I'm not saying say that you teach everything. I'm saying like really take care in that part, because that's probably especially SynBio being so broad, that when we have SynBio searches, we have people coming from all disciplines, and that's one of the biggest things that gets people thrown out of our first pass.
Yeah, this leads nicely into another question that we had, which is about the relevant teaching experience that you're looking for. Maybe really quickly, can we ask, how much teaching experience does somebody need, basically?
I suspect this will vary largely with the department and what their commitment or attitude towards teaching is for that position. Some positions tend to be, in my experience, more research focused, and they really want someone who's going to dedicate most of their time doing that. And others might really want someone who's going to be, eager to evolve in their teaching and to advance their teaching, the teaching program of that department. And so for those teaching positions, I think they may want people who have at least had some experience. In the cases of applicants we are reviewing, we're typically looking for things like whether you've TA'd a course, whether you've had any opportunities to guest lecture. Even talks at conferences can be a good sign that you're a good communicator. And then I think something that can help you stand out, but also help to prepare you, are these programs that a number of universities now offer around teaching preparation and learning the best practices of teaching. So I think if you can get into those kinds of programs, I know MIT had the Kaufman certificate in this, but I know other institutions have very similar programs. That's a good sign that you're kind of dedicated to being a good teacher.
Yeah, I would say for an R1 institution, for your typical tenure track position, I like, it's not something I actively look for, and I don't hear a lot of discussion about it. Partly because I think your entire package, your presentation, should you be selected for an interview, part of how we interpret that is your effectiveness as a communicator and a teacher by extension, and not necessarily have you TA 10 classes or you've learned other things in pedagogy, just partly because there are resources on campus that will allow you to grow and develop as a teacher. And so I think, at least at the application stage, what gets discussed, or at least what I hear my colleagues talking about, is one, what are the classes that you're willing to teach, or that we think you could teach, partly because, as I said, this is part of the quote unquote fit that is not explicit in the application. And so there's no way for you to know this, but we're trying to find people that can fit in a box. And so do you have someone who has a hope and a prayer of teaching some of the classes that need to be taught, as well as are you an effective communicator? Do we think that at least initially our students will learn something from you, and that you seem interested in growing as a teacher, and that's something that we'll take care of once you show up?
Yeah, that aligns with my experience, or what I've heard, that teaching experience is not necessarily required to get the interview. Like, willingness to teach, yeah, and to take on courses, but not necessarily the experience. While like your interview then serves as evaluation if you are an effective communicator, and if you are, then that will be, that will extend to also being a potentially effective teacher, lecturer.
Yeah. Do you have something to say, Josh?
Yeah, I was just going to add, one part of the faculty job application that was sort of unexpected to me was when I was writing my teaching statement, actually taking a really critical eye to pedagogy and the best methods for really teaching, and actually digging into the literature on education and research. And this was a nice opportunity to become more engaged and self-reflective in how I teach things. And that was one element that I reflected in my teaching statement that I thought was, I had conversations with people when I was on site about that I thought was very useful. And I was also going to highlight, I was in the EBRC SPA when I was a postdoc, and I was on the education working group as the liaison. And so that was an opportunity to start engaging and thinking about curriculum construction. And so EBRC offers some nice ways to, if you don't have teaching experience, to get engaged and think about teaching in that perspective. There's also great mentorship programs that you can help run, which are ways to kind of help pad those out if you don't have teaching experience. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for shout out for EBRC. And I want to kind of follow up on the interview processes, and I would like to hear, especially from Nils and Josh, that recently went through the process. Was there anything that was unexpected from the process? And from a reviewer's point of view, were there things that applicants typically are unaware of when they came for the interview? Could you comment on those, please? Thanks.
Not really unexpected, but something I not necessarily was aware of is how it is important to speak to the audience at the different stages of the interview. Like when you're doing the preliminary interview, if there is a preliminary, tailor what you're saying to that audience, to those 4 or 5 people, like figure out what they are about and then speak to that audience. And then once you've made it past the preliminary, then you want to see who are you going to present to. Like, is it going to be a department seminar, which is usually the thing? Then figure out what is that department about. Like, for example, on my search committee, there were people that were not faculty in my department. So I had to speak to that. And then for the for the interview on site, I was like I was reshaping that a little bit to suit better the audience, like the focus of the whole department. So that was something that I was not necessarily aware of in the way that you can't like just translate your research statement into the preliminary and the final, the on-site interview, but that you really need to tailor it once you get to that stage or through those stages.
Yeah, I agree. There was, things that are unexpected are hard to think of. I guess the biggest thing is, and this was something I did expect, is sort of the length of the days when you're going on these interviews. And so that they can be quite long. You're meeting with a lot of people. You're having quick, 30-minute conversations with many, many people throughout the day, and just kind of, being able to keep yourself energized throughout that whole day's process is something that was, an unexpected burden for me, right? I'm somewhat of an introvert at times. And so, that could show as long time. The other element was I was based in Europe when I was going on this, and so that made things a little more difficult. I was jet lagged for most of my interviews, and so I wouldn't advise people do that. So dealing with just being exhausted is an element that was unexpected to me. Yeah,
I second that. I remember that from 16 years ago, being exhausted by the interviews without a time difference. I want to add one thing that I found surprising, that at least it seemed not all candidates know, is when they get to the interview, you are being interviewed by every single person you meet. Students, faculty, undergrads, whoever it is, they are being asked for their feedback. And there are some candidates in the past that have very openly told them that this is just their backup or whatever, like an offhand comment. And that, anyway,
Yeah, that's important. Like, once you arrive to the location, you're in interview mode. Like, until you get back on the plane and fly out, it's all interview.
Possibly even the hotel receptionist. Like, you really don't know who all they have really great relationships with.
Who talks to whom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another element, they're not all structured the same. Some universities will invite multiple candidates simultaneously, which does also change the dynamic a little bit. And then especially when you all go out to dinner at the end of the first day, and in that experience, yeah.
The infamous UK model of terror.
Yeah.
Yeah, and components of interviews might be different. So in my experience, some of the universities had asked me to do like a teaching lecture and others didn't. And even variability between those. I had one institution that kind of sent me a list of topics and said, pick one. And I picked one that I thought was the least objectionable. And then they sent me the textbook and said, okay, you're teaching chapter 12. And so it might be a very different experience depending on which institution you're interviewing at.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Also very interesting stories. So we're going to open it up now to the audience questions. And so feel free to either raise your hand or put something into the chat, and then we can ask something for you. I see we already have a question from Simon. So go ahead.
Oh, thank you guys for putting on this great panel. I appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedules. So it's been very positive, and I love all the feedback you guys have been giving. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, what makes someone know, or maybe like, what is a good sign that maybe academia isn't good for you? You know, what is the flip side of it?
That academia is not good for you?
Or like, not a good fit for you, yeah.
I think one thing is if you don't like working with trainees and you don't like mentoring, it's not for you. I don't think an academic lab, in my view, is one that is solely striving for science. To be honest, I think science is a byproduct if you're doing your job right, but really what you're producing is trained scientists, and that is your main goal. And so if you don't like, helping people grow and become, reach their potential, you're going to be very frustrated in this role.
Also, keep in mind that most of those trainees will not be very much like you. You think they will be, but everybody is so different, and a lot of them have very different goals. And yeah, adapting to that, it can be very frustrating because you'd think they want to get their research project to work, but maybe that's not really their main goal. And anyway, just finding the ways to motivate people. This whole job is people. I completely agree with you that our job is producing scientists, not science. And we love science and we want science too, but yeah, it can be a lot. And I personally love that part, but I think in industry, you still mentor people and all of those things, but you're mentoring people that have already been through this growth process. And so you got to know that you like this part.
The other, taking it in a different direction. The other thing I would say is that if you are somebody that likes a lot of structure, then this is probably not the job for you. I think the only structure that we have is that you need to be in the classroom from 9 to 10, but other than that, your schedule is on your own, right? Whether or not you write a grant, whether or not you're at a conference, whether or not you are doing you're in the lab teaching, training your students, I mean, that is totally on you. And so if you love routines and need some kind of external motivator to thrive, then this might not be the best time for you.
Yeah, that's very important. Be self-motivated and in general a driven person, like love what you do. Otherwise, yeah, if you need somebody to tell you what to do, then academia is probably not for you.
There's one more thing, which is the stress and your stress level when it comes to dealing with things you can't control. Especially things like you will always be either short on funding or short on people to do the work that you just got funded to do. And it's very uncomfortable. And if that you will always be stressed one way or the other. So yeah, if that makes you very tense, like, pick a job maybe where you're not going to be that stressed from the situation itself, which you really cannot change. It will be impossible to keep that perfectly balanced. And so yeah, don't try it, but just do your best and relax through it.
I guess in a similar vein, if you're not able to set boundaries well, like work-life balance wise, this might be hard for you. I mean, I think it's a skill that we all work on and acquire perhaps, but you're your own boss. So you could potentially work 24/7 if you let yourself.
if you like to, manage people to some degree, that is an element of this job that's quite important, and just keeping people motivated. And so if that's something you don't want to be doing, this might not be a good fit in that regard. Yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility. That's like something I not necessarily was aware of. I was always like, yeah, I finally not have to do the work myself in the lab anymore all the time. But now you're responsible for making it work for the others. Like,
And people's paychecks.
yeah, like the students, they expect you to know what's going on. So yeah, you're responsible for that. So yeah, that is a lot of responsibility, and be comfortable with carrying that responsibility.
And you're also responsible when things go horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I saw that David had popped up and he is raising his hand there. So David, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Wonderful, thanks, Ross. I had a question in regards to how you judge kind of the holistic vision of an applicant's laboratory. Is this something that happens early on in the process, or is it once it kind of passed on through the initial screening? Essentially, do they have an idea for what they want to do and how they're going to fund it, or is kind of, at what point does that really become important?
I think that's in our case in the first pass questions, but we're not looking as carefully at it. Like, we check to make sure it exists, and at least superficial glance, it's aligned, to say they're going to work on making biochemicals and they're going to go to DOE, that makes sense, right? Like some knowledge of that level. And then like later looking much more carefully at like, is this a great idea? Are they going to be basically competing with 100 other people doing exactly the same thing? Or is this a fresh take on it? That kind of thing is just a little bit further in our process than the first pass.
I think that becomes, very important when you're doing the chalk talk. This is when you're really selling your vision in that regard. And I mean, you're making this more or less $1 million pitch to the universities of, this is the vision and this is how we're going to actually implement it. And that's really the opportunity where you have to have that very sound.
There's a hand up from Abdul. Can you?
So hold on a question. I think there are a couple of questions that came through the chat first. I don't know if we should read those out.
Yeah, so Sebastian's question on, would you favor research statements with more broad and general topic ideas, or fewer aims described in more depth?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a one size fits all approach to this, but what I had done was to have a bit of both. So I presented kind of 3 aims, one that was short term, kind of low risk, one that was medium term, higher risk, and one that was very long term. So this is kind of where the vision of my lab kind of came out. And the ideas that were more short term, i.e. those that I'd be writing grant applications around immediately, I was much more detailed in their approach, but not exhaustingly technical in the detail, just so that someone could understand that I have a grasp of what this grant application will look like, and I know which grant agency I'm going to be targeting. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I'm sure others take other approaches as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you in that we look at both. I mean, I don't have a good answer because I think for the research statement, at least for me, there are a couple of things that I'm looking for. One is I think we're trying to identify what your brand will be. And so the way that I've heard my colleagues best describe this is that like 5-6 years from now, when you're going up for tenure, what do we think your peers are going to say about you? And so we're looking for that vision of what will your unique contributions to science be and why that's important. So we're looking at the motivation, the opportunities you're going to pursue in your a high-level plan for how you're going to sustain that through funding. But at the same time, for that plan to be credible, you do have to provide some depth, not necessarily depth that we're going in the weeds of the experiments or that we're really evaluating the nooks and crannies for your ideas, but more so to convince us that you have the right appropriate training in this area, and you will eventually figure it out. Because I'm sure if you ask everybody in this panel, our research statement versus what we're doing right now, very different things. How it's evolved is a function of a variety of things. And so I think it's really just about showing that you're credible, but also articulating very clearly what your place in the academic community is going to be.
I think this is also some element of sort of judging your audience and which department or institute you're applying to. So for example, I was applying to a civil environmental engineering department, but I didn't really know it at the time. So I happened to have themes within mine that were broader, that touched on those elements, and then we got connected to that department. And so I think having sort of this, slightly broad, but opportunity to teach people about what it is that I'm interested in trying to research was helpful for getting that connection to this department specifically, even though I didn't apply directly to this department in this job, at least. Yeah.
I will point out that we're all engineers here on the panel, and so I think our experience is slightly different. But because I think, say for example, like chemistry, I believe their research statement, their cultural expectations on something on the order of like 20 pages, which is far more detailed than any engineering has any patience for. And so it will also depend on where you're applying.
Okay, before we get to Efrain and Abdul, who raised his hand before, we'll do one more from the chat. So there's a question from Ari. Do you have any advice on how to pick the right time to start applying for group leader positions? How much postdoctoral experience is useful before starting to apply for more independent positions, rather than continuing to get more postdoc experience?
I'll start on this. I think it's not a time question, actually, but an experience question. And for me, I would say having experience mentoring several graduate students or undergraduates and simultaneously writing some grant proposals, either for some transitional award that's for you or with the PI that you're at, and really starting to take ownership of those things is a really good indication that you're ready to move into the leadership level and do them.
I think part of it is also circumstantial. It's oftentimes like right place, right time. And depending on what your goals are and your geographical constraints, you might want to be a little bit opportunistic. So in my case, I'm Canadian. I wanted to come back to Canada. There's like a handful of institutions. Literally, I put in like 5 applications because there are really not that many universities, especially those that have biomedical engineering programs that I could apply to. And so I had to be very opportunistic. So from the day I walked into my postdoc, I was looking to see which applications were coming up. And I had even told my postdoc advisors, like, I probably will be applying very quickly. And there's trade-offs to that approach. You might end up going in way too early and you kind of put that institution off to you. But if you think your application is strong enough and you can kind of sell the story of your postdoc kind of contributing to that and delaying your start date to finish your postdoc, then I think that strategy can work. So that's a strategy I took and ultimately got me to my position.
Another comment that I would say, apart from that, I think that was a really good comment about like, it's right time, right place, is I find it really hard to evaluate what the right time is. I feel, I don't know, maybe it's just a personal thing, but like I work well with a deadline. And so I find myself rising to the challenge. I mean, I think if you were asking me like, when did I know I would be a good faculty candidate? I would have told you never. I still don't feel that way. And I mean, that's a little bit of imposter syndrome. But I do think putting yourself in a situation where you have to actually rise to that challenge, sometimes you will be pleasantly surprised. And so I kind of don't want to encourage people to like wait until they figured it out, because I think there's always stuff to figure out.
Okay, maybe Abdul, if you still have a question, you can go, and then Ryan, then Ice.
So thank you, Russ. So I think like, in other engineering departments, for example, like in CS, it is very common to like, hire like fresh graduate, PhD graduates. But in departments like, of life sciences, it's kind of expected to do a postdoc. So, but I think like, you still see like, some applicants like, who are applying after PhD. So is there any difference where you evaluate the profiles of fresh graduates versus postdocs? And again, like, when you evaluate a postdoc who has been doing the postdoctoral work for like 5 years versus 2 years, do you like take that into account? And so that's my first question. And second question, like, I wanted to know your opinion about the junior group leadership positions. I think they're opening up, I think, to give, I think, opportunity to fresh graduate, PhD graduates. What is your opinion on like, pursuing them versus like, probably going for a postdoc position? Thank you.
So I'll just quickly answer part of your question. So your part about experience, I do think we take that into consideration in the sense that, for example, the productivity that we expect from a postdoc that has been postdocing for 5 years versus a PhD who's freshly graduated, I think is very different. And so again, this kind of goes back to my comment about the right time. I think people think of metrics like they want to have like 10 papers or they want to have like a Nature paper, whatever. And I think I would not aspire to those goals, because I think those goals they evolve and grow as your training evolves. And so it really is about, can you put together a competitive and compelling application with the credentials that you have at this moment? Are you able to demonstrate the skills needed for success, as opposed to like, again, do you have five Nature papers? Again, well, I didn't have that.
The other way around.
Yep.
I kind of had that, but I still was unsuccessful for quite a while, until like the right time and the right place, basically.
The way I've heard it described is, the applicants that are kind of more junior in their career, earlier in their career, you have to try to project what their potential will be and how much of a rising star they are, when, where they're headed. And that can be harder to project. But again, if you're able to put together, as Kevin said, a compelling application and show them that that is your trajectory, I think you can still have success and not have to do too long of a postdoc. But again, it's a lot of luck of right place, right time, and then being able to see that potential in you and to see the fit with their department.
Okay, so I think, Efrain, did you still have a question before we go to ICE?
Yeah, so thank you for the
question
answers.
was broadly answered, but I wanted to know if there was any other advice that you could have for people who are starting their postdocs now and are hoping, I'm shooting for a shorter postdoc. Started like a month ago, and my fellowship project hasn't even started. How do I strategize? What my goals should be for this year to set myself up for success for those applications? What are maybe some of your insights into how to plan out, that first year of your postdoc?
So for me, I also did a short postdoc. I was there 2 years. And so I came in with a plan. So I had a target end date that I was very transparent about. And I had a list of goals for myself, mainly around skills I wanted to learn, and also ensuring that the project that I was contributing to it's meeting the expectations that it was intending to meet with my contribution, right? So it was clear that my 2-year postdoc was not going to get this project over the finish line. But in this kind of exchange, I wanted to contribute to get it moving along into a place where it could be handed off to someone to finish, and that ultimately happened. So I think just being very clear with your goals, like, are you trying to learn something? Are you trying to get XYZ publications done? Are you trying to network? Like, what are the exact goals that you're trying to achieve in your postdoc? And being very conscientious and direct about achieving those things, and realistic.
Yeah, and it's also, it's a short time. If you're trying to, mentor people or try to start something at the new institution that you're at, try to start doing that more or less immediately so that you have an opportunity to really make some impact there. That was something that I had to jump on and was fortunate to do. I had a postdoc that was, I did a 3-year fellowship, and I had an element of where I wanted to go to Europe and connect with some people on some certain science. And so I had that in mind and gave myself that sort of, time block to work across. But at the same time, I was looking at faculty job applications and starting to think what it is that I need to do to actually, go on the job market when I'm ready to go on the job market after I've achieved those things. And so I think there's a good opportunity to like try to put your package together and see where you need to expand maybe what your current state is. Yeah.
I echo that suggestion to think about what your package would look like and what the gaps might be. And that if you don't know already, whether it is skills or networking or new collaboration in Europe or a particular, like showing that you can train people, whatever it is, making sure you figure out what you need by trying to put together what you have and seeing what holes there might be.
Thank you.
Ace, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I have a very short question about the process that I know that apart from application to the faculty directly and go through the interview, there are other like recruitment that go on at the faculty candidate sessions or some other parts that are happening. So can you mention briefly how does that usually being accumulated into the process of the faculty search? Like I meant like, in a conference where there are like faculty candidate sessions, something like that, how does that usually like, getting into the process of the interview or something?
I don't like those. So I don't use them very much personally, but others can answer.
I'm not sure if this is what you were referring to, but I know some of these conferences like the MES have the faculty poster sessions. Is that kind of what you're thinking about? Yeah, so I know our school has kind of used those as a kind of soft first interview and will headhunt people, that they think would be a particularly good fit for us. So I think they can be quite worthwhile. They're a great networking opportunity. And I know some of our candidates that have been kind of fast-tracked to the full interview after having met our director, our members of our community.
Yes. So my department, we do headhunt and use these opportunities to kind of touch base and get a first pass at people. Although I will admit that usually the people that we headhunt, we already had our eyes on them. And so it's not like we walked in and like, wow, this is a person we hadn't heard of. We already have our eyes on key people. We just want to meet them in person before we move forward. So there's less control, unfortunately, than I think you'd probably like to hear.
That makes sense. Thanks a lot. I mean, and I would love to know like how it was like, being seen from the other side rather than like from those who appear at the faculty candidate sessions. I think they have like different kind of expectation there.
I do think they can be nice opportunities to sort of practice your pitch and what your vision. And so from that perspective, they're good as sort of learning tools. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks a lot.
So we're close to 4, and if people have to leave, I think you can go. But we have one last question from Juan in the chat. Is there a time limit for publications considered during the application process? For example, if it's older than 5 years, is there like a certain rule that you don't consider that anymore?
Not for us. Publications are just part of the story, right? And they're telling your experience and what sorts of things you do. And it's more how you talk about those research experiences in your statement of like what you've done in the past and how that relates that matters. So if something you did 10 years ago is influencing something you want to do, it's not going to be discounted. I mean, that'll be considered for sure.
Yeah, I think the only context that this would matter is if there is a discontinuity. So like, say, for example, you haven't published anything in the last 5 years, and it might be a topic of discussion for why that gap exists, but it's not like, oh, your papers are too old, we don't count them.
And I think maybe on the other end, if you have things that you're, trying to list as in press, those are not looked on as well as if you had this out as a preprint or something like that. Just the other end of time, yeah.
So I think that's it for what we have right now. Thanks everyone. Thanks to all our panelists again for coming on. Thanks to the audience for coming and asking some great questions. I think it was a great discussion overall. I put a couple of links, and I'm going to add a couple more links while I'm trying to talk at the same time into the chat. So the first one is a link to this website that Nika made actually when she was a postdoc and still leads now as a faculty member, which is called Advice to a Scientist. It has a bunch of great articles written by faculty and even grad students and postdocs, sort of helping to give advice to scientists at every stage of your career. So I'd recommend checking it out and maybe passing it on to people in your research groups as well. There's also a BME job tracker. If there's other links, I see that Alan is adding as well. You sent those to me. I don't know if you need to send those to everyone else.
Yeah. I know there is a chemical engineering one. I just don't remember where the link is anymore, but it does exist.
Yeah, there's this one here that's a chemi one. I don't know if that's the same as, that is, the same that Alan sent. And
the other one is on chemistry.
So check these out. It's a great collection. They're not necessarily perfectly up to date. So if you have like key places that you're targeting, I would recommend to also just like have those websites open and refresh them. And maybe you will be the person that adds to the list. But yeah, if there's any like final statements before we go, I'll sign off on my own account and then say thanks again to the panelists and thanks to Alan for co-hosting.
Just want to say
for organizing.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So as a final send off, this has been a production of the Engineering Biology Research Consortium Student and Postdoc Association. If you would like to learn more about SPA, check out our website at ebrc.org and then find the tab for SPA. You can apply for membership as a postdoc/graduate student, and we're a great community. We have events like this. We're very supportive and fun. There's lots of outreach things that you can get involved in. There's a mentorship program that was mentioned by Josh earlier, and plenty of other activities and benefits to membership. So check us out. And thanks to the staff for supporting this. And thanks again to all of you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.